Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today for Hidden Gems and Some in Plain Sight. My name is Sam Orwig. I'm a member of the Adult Education Committee, and it is a joy for all of us to welcome you here for this wonderful program featuring our very own Andrea Denny, who graciously agreed to be our lead presenter today. Rebecca Dixon and I started working on this about 8 months ago, and we would like to thank many people, but especially Don Allerton, for the storytelling, the perspective, the history, and the deep understanding of the design elements of our church. We also like to thank Micah Marty for providing some excellent photographs, many of which you'll see. And then we thank Andrea Denny for the perspective and depth that she brings to this program. We will touch on a number of topics. There'll be roughly 10 categories that you will see, and we will allow time for questions and answers at the end of our program today. I encourage you to pick up the adult education class schedule on your way out just to see what might be coming up. And then we have a few reminders, such as bear in mind that this is a live recording. It's being shared right now online, and it will be preserved on YouTube. So what you say will not stay in Las Vegas. I'd also like to show you some of the details that Rebecca and I went into. She is an architecture docent, and boy, does that show in the work she does, and I'm so grateful for the background and information that she brings to this program. Also, one of the stars of our show today really is Ralph Adams Cram, and I was lucky to come across this book published in 1914, right when he was finishing up his design work here. It's a collection of speeches and magazine articles that gave us extra perspective about what's going on. There is a handout. Most of you have it right now. For those who are watching online, it features 4 quotations, one from Ralph Adams Cram, the architect of of the sanctuary and church, and then the other from Charles Connick, the designer of the stained glass windows, and I will read those briefly for our online audience. If churches are made radiant and beautiful places of worship, we can have a spiritual regeneration without anyone knowing what is going on. From Ralph Cram, this, I believe, is the secret and the function of art. It is a language of divine revelation, the great sequence of mystical symbols that alone are adequate and efficient when the soul of man enters into the infinite realm of truth. Also from Cram, by itself, architecture is nothing. Allied with the structural crafts and the artist's crafts, it is everything. The greatest art in the world, for it is a plexus of all the arts. It assembles them in a great synthesis that is vaster than any art by itself alone, that gathers them together in the perfect service of God and man, and I think you'll see that that is our sanctuary. And then finally, from Charles Connick, the stained glass artist, beauty can preach as very few men with bundles of words can preach. I want to make beautiful interiors for both churches and souls. I want people to hear my windows singing. So if we could turn our minds and hearts to prayer, I will read just a short prayer from George MacDonald. Give me open eyes, O God, eyes quick to discover thine indwelling in the world which thou hast made. Let all lovely things fill me with gladness, and let them uplift my mind to thine everlasting loveliness. Amen. And with this, I would like to introduce Andrea Denny. We will make a quick transition to our slideshow and begin the program.
Now you get to see my PowerPoint skills, which are not considerable. I think we're good. Are we all okay? And can everybody hear me okay? I can modulate my voice as needed. So I feel like I am presenting someone else's master's thesis. Sam and Rebecca, when they asked me, and it felt like at a moment of weakness, like I was running from one meeting to the next, and they asked if I'd be willing to do this, and I thought they're going to want to know, like, what does it take to keep the building clean, secure? What's my role in figuring out a budget for how all this happens? And then they started sending me their work, and I'm like, are you sure you don't want to present this, because their depth of knowledge far exceeds mine? So I want to make sure I give credit for them. If you want to know what it takes to keep this place clean or secure or a budget, feel free to ask me those questions. I have those down. But we'll do our best to get through this with Sam and Rebecca's help. So you're going to hear more about Ralph Adams Cram and Charles J. Connick, the designer of Fourth Church's stained glass, and both expressed, as Sam said, this conviction that art led people closer to God. And I think our church is a testament to that. Right? Like, I think in churches always our fear is, don't let the building become your idol. Right? Have y'all heard that? That if it becomes your idol, you're not serving the right master. And so I think that I'm always worried about that, especially when we're entrusted to shepherd a place like this. I am not one that says, oh, don't touch that or don't use that room because it's historical. I want our building to be used 7 days a week, 22 hours a day if we could do it, because we need to clean sometimes. But I think what this presentation has helped me do is understand how those two things, ministry and art, work hand in hand. And I'm thankful for Rebecca and Sam to do that. So Sam had given us this quote: if churches are made radiant and beautiful places of worship, we can have a spiritual regeneration without anyone know what's going on. And I like that subversiveness. Beauty can preach as very few men or women with bundles of words can preach. And I want to make beautiful interiors for both churches and souls. So we're going to start our virtual tour today outside the church, taking first a close look at the steeple, which serves as a public testament to the faith community that set its cornerstone here in 1914. So, like so many parts of our church campus, the steeple itself contains a bunch of hidden gems, artistic elements that are a bit too high for us to see. Like, I'm wondering, when they designed it, who'd they think was going to look at that? The Hancock building wasn't built yet. So talk about art for art's sake. Those are amazing photographs. So let's take a look at this. So the small image is probably not familiar, because with good reason, it's pretty high up. There are heads on the steeple, along with 5 of them holding musical instruments. So you're not likely to find them on the same thing on the spire of the NBC building. Rather, 1914 architect Ralph Adams Cram, himself an Anglican, was deeply knowledgeable about ecclesiastical architecture and related design. He designed 60 houses of worship. We weren't his only gig, but he designed 60 houses of worship in religious buildings in collaborations with sculptors and stained glass artists. Cram was also a writer, and we talked about the Ministry of Art that Sam found that was published in the same year that the building was opened. So for the spire or the steeple itself, why? Don't all churches have steeples? Now, their origins go back, steeples' origins go back over 1,000 years. It's used in churches, but also in other buildings, because it was put on the most prominent building of a small village or town so that people could find their ways there. And the bells were often used to keep time before people had a watch on their wrist, or call people to worship. So that was the function of it. Certainly, they were in neo-Gothic cathedrals, and which is Cram's chosen design. Fort's predecessor church, the building that was at Rush and Superior, remember we had a building that burned down the day of the Chicago fire, also had a steeple. And then you've heard our bells going. That is a recording played at specific times a day, and they can be activated. Also something that's nearing the end of its life, and we need to upgrade technology. So I can tell you more about that. So we begin our tour of some of our artistic gems more prominently visible. And again, we cannot thank Micah enough. He is our visual media coordinator. So our purpose is to remind you of our fascinating adornments and to better appreciate how they enrich our spiritual lives. Also, I'm going to say this a couple of times. There are people that believed in the legacy in this church and wanted it to go on into perpetuity, and we are so thankful for their gifts, because there are things that as you go through here, we're able to do outside our operating budget because someone has made a generous gift. And I think we'll see that in some of the art we're going to view today. Okay, so we'll go to the next one. So this is where my Central Illinois accent comes through. So the tympanum that Sam helped me say is the entrance over the Michigan Avenue entrance, or it's the sculpture over the Michigan Avenue entrance. Most of us are usually greeting people, right? We're too busy shaking hands or making sure we don't fall up the stairs to notice that. But next time, take an extra minute, get to church a minute early so you can see what is in that. The sculpture's been here since 1914. It was part of the original design. And beneath the tympanum, the inscription reads from right to left, "The Master is here and calleth for thee." And if that welcoming greeting sounds familiar, recall the story in the Gospel of John when Lazarus was sick and his sisters, Mary and Martha, sent for Jesus, hopeful that he would cure their brother. And Martha greeted Jesus and then had to call for Mary. And from John chapter 11, verse 28, "The Master is come and calleth for thee." So that is also the inscription that concludes our 1990 book, Light in the City. So the large figure standing in the center robed, we think is perhaps Moses, robed, bearded, looking reverently down with his arms raised above his head. And at his feet are a group of people that indicate reverence, reception of divine instruction. Maybe it was the 10 Commandments. Now, there's an inscription carved in the semicircle above the sculpted human figures, and it's difficult to read. But consulting with an expert on ancient texts, the best explanation we found is that the script in the tympanum as well as in the welcome text is an adapted type of Lombardic capitals. Is anybody an expert in Lombardic capitals that might want to? Okay. Feel free to correct me if you've got that. So a Gothic revival form that's used for many formal inscriptions in architecture and stone carvings. And so it reads, and this hopefully sounds familiar to you, "The Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord maketh his face to shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace." And this is a familiar blessing from the book of Numbers. So interestingly enough, if I had done that work, I would want my name on it somewhere. We don't know the person that's responsible for that sculpture. The major architect, Ralph Adams Cram, designed many Gothic revival churches and presumably knew where to find artisans that could do that. But that feels like such a lovely piece of art to not have any clue who did it. In the narthex, anybody know where that's located? Where are my ushers? Because it's right by that usher table. It's right behind the usher table. So it's a dedication plaque with an image on it that the tympanum belief has this inscription: "To the glory of God and in loving memory of Elizabeth Navins Ross." So carved in the tympanum above the entrance is erected. So again, one of the many examples of hidden gems. I don't know that I had paid that much attention to it, and I'm back by the ushers all the time, but that is back by where the ushers usually stand. Okay, now we're going to talk about one of my favorite projects that I've been involved with since I've been at Fourth Church. Anybody know these? If you've ever had a conversation with me, I pointed them out to you, right? They're the Frederick Clay Bartlett murals that are in the sanctuary. So they're about 5 stories above our heads. So it's very difficult to see all of the details. But it was the work of Chicago artist Frederick Clay Bartlett. Bartlett was long-lived. He lived 80 years from 1873 to 1953. His father, Adolphus Bartlett, was the president of a prosperous hardware store. Many of you have heard, True Value, and served on the board of trustees for the Art Institute for 35 years. His family's affluence allowed Frederick to study in Munich and Paris. And after his marriage in 1900, he returned to Chicago and rented a studio in Chicago's now famous Fine Arts Building on South Michigan Avenue. Now, he became a good friend and colleague to Howard Van Doren Shaw, the Chicago architect who collaborated on Fourth Church's design with Ralph Adams Cram. Bartlett was also commissioned to design the magnificent mural at Second Presbyterian Church. If you guys have made your way down there, the Tree of Life is just exquisite, and they recently restored that. So if you haven't been to Second Presbyterian Church, don't go on Sunday morning. Stay here for worship, but they do lots of tours. So, as an accomplished muralist, Bartlett was also a major collector of post-impressionist art. He donated his entire collection to the Art Institute of Chicago, where he was a trustee. And his wife's name is written in the title, the Helen Birch Bartlett Memorial Collection. And the most prominent work is the enormous Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte by George Seurat. So isn't that a cool connection, that the person who did our murals? So, the holy mural. So what's overhead as we crane our necks to look up? The ceilings and other paintings are considered examples of arts and craft artistic movement. The image and others were painted on canvas that were affixed to the ceiling as the sanctuary was nearing completion. So if I could just take a minute here to talk about I've been here about 6.5 years, and my first meeting with the property committee, they took me on a tour of the whole campus, and they pointed out these murals. And at that time, there is a mural in the north balcony, and they're like, see that little corner? It's starting to delaminate, and we're gonna need to address that. Okay, there's a lot of things. My first year was, let me take you on a tour. We're gonna need to address this. And I was here for about 7 months before COVID and everything changed. And when we came back to the sanctuary post-COVID, those murals had folded in half. They had delaminated to the point where they had folded in half. And that's just over time, the glue gave way. There were no leaks. It wasn't caused by water damage. It's just the age of this, the glue gave way, and that became our first mural that we restored. And so that has been a multi-year project for us. So back to the holy mural. So what is overhead is this one, and the image and others are you'll see symbols like doves, grapes, symbols of abundance or God's blessing. We see some vines. What is over the head of each of the angels? This image is repeated several times through both the north and the south aisles. And some of these things, sorry Fred if I'm making this difficult. Last year, some of this plaster started falling. So if you saw me running around at the back of the sanctuary on the south side, some of the plaster was giving way. And so that stepped up when we were going to restore that one. So definitely a full-time job keeping these in good shape. There are 16 bays of murals. We have restored all but one of the images that have angels in them. The other ones that are decorative we'll start on next, but our priority was to do the ones with angels on them. So in this image, you'll see we have several angels with their musical instruments. 2 early versions of a violin, 2 with scrolls or musical scores, 1 with cymbals, another with pipes. There's also some pineapples, symbolizing perhaps an abundance of hospitality. As we heard from Camille today, she was hesitant, or pineapple? If you were there, she talked about in her time with children, the pineapples that's carved on the seats in the chancel. And I wanted to say, oh, she's getting ready to make a advertisement for our meeting today. She knows we're talking about pineapples. Then you'll note some of them are just decorative, the blue and gold ones that we'll take on next. So there have been 2 different times of restoration. Some of the bays were restored in the 1990s, and we see some of that work when we were restoring them because techniques have gotten so much better from 1990. So the group that did it in 1990 had one process, and now Parma Restoration, who's doing, and you'll see the picture of them working on that, is doing it now. They actually, to put them back up, they no longer use glue. It is, for, in my layman's term, like an iron. It's like an iron-on transfer that they put on the murals to keep them. So it could all be undone if we ever need to take them down. But in the 90s, somebody nailed them up. And so, again, our technique has gotten better. And I just want to say a special shout out for Mary Suleiman, who is a very generous congregation member who talked to me about what we needed and came through with a really substantial gift. Because we were, through Board of Trustees, we're able to do one a year. And through her generosity, we were able to do 4 restorations this year. They're all about $60,000 to $80,000 to do. Each bay is $60,000 to $80,000 to do that. So will you go to the one in Gillette Commons? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so this image may be more familiar to you because it's in the Commons, right above the bench out there. And if you've been here for a while, you know that when we put the new organ, the Andrew Pipe organ in, a screen had to be created. We took down some murals because where the pipes were, also there was a mural. So the mural got restored and put in Gillette Commons, and there was a screen created, so it looks the same. Now, fun fact, when that screen was created, it was before we had restored the panels, so now the screen is much darker than the restored panels are. So that'll be my next thing that we address. Okay, so I think we're ready to go to angel pedestals. So, along the rim of the sanctuary, there are a series, and I believe, Don Allerton, check me, 7-foot angels or 9-foot angels?
7 feet, 10 inches.
Thank you very much, sir. See, I told you there are people in this room who know much more about this than I do. So here's the other thing that we've done is those angels, they're beautiful. And when I first got here, I'm like, why don't we ever light those? And we light them on Christmas Eve and we light them on Holy Week. And I assumed there was some theological reason for that. And finally I asked Leszek, who's our facility manager, and he goes, no, it's about preserving light bulbs. Because in order to get to the light bulbs, you had to build a scaffold up to each angel, and that's the only way to change the light bulb. So those light bulbs were installed in the 90s, and by preserving the light bulbs, we never had to change them. But last year, we did a major renovation. I'll talk more when we get to the chandeliers. We did a major renovation and converted to LED lights. And so now you'll notice they're on every single Sunday. And my thing is they're on every time our sanctuary is used. Because we have 30,000 hours that those LED bulbs will last. And I'll be dead by the time they need to be replaced. And it will be someone else's problem. But sometimes we focus on the angels and we miss the pedestals. And the pedestals are amazing art too. You're all going to bring binoculars when you come to worship next week, aren't you? Okay, so the carved wooden angels represent Psalm 150, which opens with, "Praise ye the Lord, praise God in his sanctuary, praise him in the firmament of his power." And so each angel represents a musical instrument mentioned in that psalm. Now the pedestals are the 4 gospel writers, and we have images representing Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So Matthew, represented as the angel scribe or the holy man. The symbol for Mark is the winged lion. Luke is the winged ox. And John is portrayed as the eagle. And these four are also symbolized this way in our limestone pulpit. So you start seeing those together. Let's see, the next religious symbols, we have the pomegranate, which is a symbol of the resurrection and is often seen being held by the Christ child in the Madonna paintings. So now you'll think of pomegranates in a different way. The half pedestal there are two of these, one with the Holy Spirit and the dove shown here, and another with a fleur-de-lis decorative element associated with the conversion and baptism of Clovis, also associated with the iris, also symbol of the triune God. I didn't know that. By the way, a small group of iris in the Garth have been said that they were brought by John Buchanan from the church he served before taking the call at Forth. Don, is that true?
That's true. In fact, the one in Columbus came from the church that he was at previous. So
And the people online that may not be able to hear that, John Buchanan brought the iris from his church, and those came from the church previous that he served. So there is a sailboat, and that symbolizes the journey of faith. Or reflecting on the apostles' connection to ships, especially stories involving Jesus with them on water. And then the fish and the anchor. And we want to call attention to this because Sam loves this fish. I will make you fishers of men, early symbol of the Christian church, holding fast to the anchor of faith, but also who can resist a charming picture of a fish? Does everybody see this right here? We wonder if Dr. Seuss saw that. And he came to church, saw that, and decided to make that. Sam said, Cat in the Hat. That's her joke. Okay, now to the metal work of our sanctuary. Am I okay pace? Okay, I'm looking for people sleeping. We believe so, but we haven't been able to find confirmation of it. The other question is, did he carve the angels? And that's not his medium, but I don't know. I would love, if anybody finds that out, if he was responsible for the actual carving of the angels. But there are such similarities in those pedestals as there are to his panels. It feels like a good bet. So, Ralph Adams Cram has this quote, "By itself, architecture is nothing. Allied with the structural crafts and the artist crafts, it is everything, the greatest art in the world. For it is the plexus of all arts. It assembles them in a great synthesis that is vaster than any art by itself alone, that gathers them together in perfect service of God and man." So throughout our campus, you'll see carved limestone, woodwork, clay tiles, painting, stained glass, widely used throughout the sanctuary, and they represent the work of some of the most skilled craftsmen in the era. So this slide is of Walter Janowski, and I'm sorry to him that I butchered his name. He deserved so much better. There's one more that we want to talk about, metal work, and that's in the chandeliers and the wall sconces throughout the narthex. And so, again, I challenge you when you come in, we look at it as, this is lighting the way, but the wall sconces are exquisite. So spend some time looking at wall sconces, and then also the chandeliers, if you could do that. So the chandeliers in the sanctuary carry a design theme of a rose and rose leaves, a crown, and grapevines. So this is also, I think, when I said we did a lighting project. So we got to the point that those light bulbs were no longer being manufactured. And so we searched for them on eBay. So when one burned out, we would search on eBay to see if we can find them. At one point, I remember Sam offered to drive to Canada and buy them for me. One particularly bad Christmas, we were really out of lights, and we moved them from the back of the sanctuary to above the choir loft so the choir could see their music. So when you thought I just wasn't paying attention to light bulbs being out, it's because we could no longer buy them. So last summer, we did a very exciting project to convert all of the chandeliers to LED lights. Now, we talked to a bunch of lighting vendors, and one wanted to crate them up, take a semi, and cart them to Minneapolis. And I don't have a problem with Minneapolis, but I don't want our chandeliers there. It just felt too high of risk, right? We found another lighting designer who, during the week, from Monday through Friday, would build a scaffold up to each chandelier, do the work on those, and then take the scaffold down before you showed up on Sunday to worship. And so all of these lights, as well as the ones I told you about the angel, all of the lights in the sanctuary have now been converted to LED. It's only been recently that the quality is good enough that we were willing to do it, because LED early on lost the warmth. And so we, every couple of years, would get a bid, and we would say, nope, not yet. And then finally last year felt like that we could do it, and I think it turned out well, but you'll have to let me know if you disagree with that. So this is one of the ones I did not know, and so I love that they taught me this. This photograph shows the more colorful work that were applied to only 2 of the chandeliers, and that's in the chancel area. So I have to believe it was value engineering. They had planned to do painting on all of the chandeliers, but only did the 2 in the chancel, right? Doesn't that feel like a decision that they made? Like, okay, let's only do the 2 in the chancel that were painted. But there's a theme of a crown and a rose that appear prominently in Janowski's design for the chandeliers, 2 symbols that were likely chosen to signify more than decorative artistry. As a liturgical symbol, the crown has been used to represent honor, sovereignty, and victory. It can also signify Christ the King, considered the many biblical references to a crown as a reward for a faithful life. So. The rose, and you'll see that throughout. It's amazing how many times it shows up in this presentation. The rose can symbolize the flower of the Spirit attainable by humankind through sacrifice, and the rose of the world signifying the Virgin Mary. Other interpretations associate it with a concept of development and growth, including spiritual regrowth. So I already told you this, but I'll tell you again in case you didn't pay attention the first time. Pay attention to the wall sconces, right? I'm so excited by these because I just don't think we spend that much effort on light fixtures anymore, right? But pay attention to the wall sconces that are throughout the narthex, again, where the rose is centered. And again, you'll see roses throughout the sanctuary. Now, anybody know where that is? Yeah, it is the rose inside the sounding board, or what I like to call the canopy over the pastor in case things fell. It wouldn't hit her in the head. So if you look at it, you'll see roses, again, prominently in woodwork and throughout this. So we'll go from there to the pulpit. And again, this is not something I noticed, and I feel like I notice a lot, but did you guys know these carved limestones among the pulpit stairs? So that's the stairway leading up to the pulpit. Just as, most of us haven't stepped into that pulpit, I don't know that we spend a whole lot of time going up the stairs, and so may not have noticed these. So there are symbols. There is the oak leaves and acorn over a lit candle. And so you know the parable of the acorns. Okay, I'm looking for somebody to shake their head yes. I'm going, you need to pay better attention in adult ed. No, there's no parable of the acorns. But, and honestly, they have no known liturgical reasons, but they do represent strength and endurance, an illustration that we can grow into a mighty tree, just like the parable of the mustard seed. There might be a mustard seed there, but it's too small, we can't see it. Like my religious humor there. Some people have dad jokes, I've got religious jokes. Okay, the other one, I think this is so cool. It is a shield with a single candle surrounded by 7 stars. The light shines in darkness. And so that's a thing that we see represented throughout our sanctuary. The central panel is a thistle, which is the national flower of Scotland. Again, anybody know that? Representing Scottish roots of Presbyterianism and also representing strength, pride, and resilience. And the open book with the words, "The word of the Lord endureth forever." Then the third panel is 3 roses and a menorah. And the roses we've already talked about at length, but why might a menorah appear here and also on the angel's pedestal? The words inscribed suggest many lamps, one light. And I thought that was a really lovely sentiment. The menorah is any 7-branched candlestick traditionally used in worship in the wilderness during the Jewish exodus from Egypt. So anyway, you're all going to be up on the chancel. Camille's going to be like, why are all the people on the chancel on Sunday morning now? Okay, the other part that, and if you're not in the choir, you may not have had a chance to stare at. This is above the choir loft in the vaulted ceiling. So again, if you don't have binoculars, it's tough to see what these are. So primarily what's up there are these 8 circular knobs. They're called bosses, carved in stone surrounding a central figure. So a boss is an architectural term used for a decorative knob on a ceiling, wall, or sculpture. And it's often found in the ceiling of buildings at the intersections of the rib vault, as they are here. And so in the center of that, you'll see an angel holding a Bible with a crown above it. And at the intersections of the ribs, there are 8 carved bosses, 4 of which have religious significance. So a pelican, the burning bush, the word of the Lord endures forever, and symbols for St. Peter. Again, I'm just mystified. That is just gorgeous work, and in a place that most of us will never see again without binoculars or a really powerful camera like Micah has. Okay. If there is one thing that I get more comments about, well, it's clean bathrooms, so we're better with clean bathrooms, but it is the Great West Window. And why isn't it lit? In fact, one of my favorite stories is a woman came up to me and exasperated said, "I just want to see Jesus." I'm like, don't we all? It's why we're here. I had no idea what she was doing with that, but okay. And she was like, no, the stained glass. Why can't we see it? So I want to say to you, and then you can take and proselytize this out. It is collateral damage of Westminster being torn down. So with lighting stained glass, it's all about proximity and angle, right? To have the right kind of lights, you need to be at the right angle and the right closeness. And Westminster provided that perfectly for that window. When it was taken down, we have had a variety of light designers in here. We have tried them from the ground shooting up. We've tried them from the top of the grats shooting down. Talked to 4 different people. The most bizarre one was erect a wall behind it and we can bounce light off of it. That didn't feel like a great decision. The best we've come up with is in order to illuminate it properly, we would need to attach very powerful lights on the glass wall of grats. And structurally, that makes that, and aesthetically, but structurally, that's very difficult to do. So again, I'm going to say it is going to be much like the LED lights eventually. Someone will come up with a way to do this, but it is something we're aware of. We have lights on. Again, every time the sanctuary is open, the lights are flipped on. They just don't do an adequate job. So that is the story of why you cannot see Jesus in the stained glass. But we'll talk about the actual window, which is what you want. So all the stained glass windows throughout the church, both the west window and east windows, were designed by Charles Connick and his successor firm between 1913 and 1948. So Cram, the architect, created an American Gothic and did more than any other architect to encourage and provide work for modern craftsmen, wood carvers, masons, sculptors, metalworkers, and stained glass architects. You won't see any Tiffany here. It's American craftsmen. The glass in our west window is comprised by very thick pieces, deep and rich in color. Connick preferred the vivid blues, a dominant color in medieval windows. And you'll see that there. So that picture, you'll see the risen Christ. And again, thankful for Micah Marty being able to get this photo. You'll see the full image of the risen Christ. And notice the pierced hands and feet. And above his head, there's a dove symbolizing the descent of the Holy Spirit. And I don't know that I had ever noticed the pierced hands and feet. And thanks, Sam, for flipping back and forth. I go back and forth from the dove to Jesus. The next thing that we'll see is a family. The central panel directly under Jesus is a family with 3 children. And not shown on our slides, but the panels on either side of this one depict figures in varying ethnic backgrounds and with varying occupational levels in society, all nations in the world. We're going to go look at that at some point. The next panels are square, so they show up better on our screen than the vertical image above. Starting from our left, as we face the window, we have Moses with the tablets, and again, that Lombardic capital script. Is no easier to decipher here. But again, I'm looking for experts. The prize goes to the person who can decipher the script. But consecrate yourselves today unto the Lord, even every man. Next one we have is a kneeling figure with a staff. We think it's John the Baptist. Behold the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world. And this window was completed just before the building was dedicated on Sunday, May 10th, 1914. Okay. We are going to spend some time on the Anderson Hall windows. Rebecca did a great presentation on that, and I'm going to commend that to you because it's online, right? Yes, and let's see, I think for the interest of time, let's skip through the Anderson windows, but go watch Rebecca's thing. She knows more about that Anderson window than anybody. Because I want to make sure we get to a couple of newer pieces for us. So this is Gerald Griffin. This you see every Sunday in the Commons, and it's accessible. It's right at eye level. It's different than the other images we have around the church, but it's appropriate for the contemporary space of the atrium of Gratz Center, and also Forth's commitment to proclaim our vision to be a church family in whom persons of color are valued and fully engaged, whose gifts and leadership strongly shape our vision to be a church family in whom persons of color are valued and fully engaged, whose gifts and leadership strongly shape our ministry. So this one is dated in 1914, and the Ascension was a year in the making. It was commissioned by Fourth Church's Racial Equity Committee and was paid for by friends and family members. So his work had been exhibited in our loggia in 2018, and it was viewed by many during that exhibition, and we had over 800 written comments about that exhibit. So as the Racial Equity Committee was exploring ways to interrupt conventional thinking about race, the REC members met with the artist in person, and he chose Jesus' Ascension as the symbol of, or subject of his painting. So Gerald Griffin is a Chicago artist and an alumnus of the School of Art Institute. He explains that our painting is part of an overall series he did on paradigm shift. And in that series of work, Griffin's purpose is to help people see different perspectives of the same event. 2 reports, and I am very fortunate that I'm here most days and I get to see people that come just to look at that painting, right? There are people that have heard about it and want to see that. And 2 powerful things was a 10-year-old biracial child. One parent is black, another is Asian, studied the painting and asked her parents, who are these people? Because I thought Jesus people were white. And to me, that is a very powerful reason for why this is such an important work for us. Another one is a black woman stood in front of it and cried and said, "I'd never seen myself represented in church art." So anyway, this passage is related to Revelations 1:9. A great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and people and language, standing before the throne and in the front of the Lamb. Okay, and then our last hidden gem, but it's not really a hidden gem, it's a pretty out there gem, but it's too important not to discuss. And this is the Quaternium, which is in Buchanan Chapel. So this I'm sure you've all seen, but we want to make sure you know the history behind it, because that is also an important part of what we're doing. So the sculpture was commissioned in memory of, or to celebrate the life of, Executive Associate Pastor Dana Ferguson. And there's many ways to memorialize a person, for example, a portrait, memoir, concert series. But this committee found a way to bring Pastor Ferguson's presence into the church in a living way, creating this visual experience that has led many spiritual enrichment. One of the committee's guiding quotations came from Dana herself. There are many definitions, in these times, we Christians live in the present based on the future of hope. We are to stay grounded in God. We are to live these days walking as closely to Christ, the risen one, learning his ways, living his gospel, and preparing ourselves in this world for the hope and the future that we know. So the artist proposal included many of the things that were lifted. First of all, location and placement. For this important and meaningful commission, the artist said, "I'm proposing a sculpture that will be suspended in front of the Dana window, catching and reflecting light as it moves through the space throughout the day." And every time you see that sculpture, it looks different. The dimensions will be approximately 19 feet in length, 9 feet wide, 6 feet high. The shape is composed of 2 stacked ellipses. The top ellipse rotated approximately 40 degrees in opposition to the bottom ellipse. The spiritual connection, the resulting shape is a reminiscence of a Mobius strip of an unending surface, an intentional reference to the concept of the eternal, an important theme to the church, which also represents the Celtic cross design in the floor of the labyrinth. The materials, the diachronic film laminated onto acrylic as the primary material, chosen to reflect the spirit of Dana herself, a colorful person with very positive energy who absorbed and reflected those around her, enhancing the lives of her congregation. And then finally, visual intentions. The sculpture will reflect the community around it, quite literally changing each moment of every day. It will be beautiful, kinetic, and unpredictable, as Dana was. The sculpture will change constantly, appearing at times very substantial and full of color, and at other times, from other angles, very ethereal and almost invisible. The motion of the sun throughout the day, the change of the light over the seasons, and even the movement of a congregation member from one seat to another will change the appearance of this sculpture dramatically. So. Okay. So I wanted to give you a few minutes for questions, and I feel like that I didn't do justice to all of their words, but I wanted to make sure there were at least a few minutes for questions if you had them for Sam, Rebecca, or we can conscript Don Allerton. Judy, do you have the microphone? Judy will call on folks. Up front, Judy.
I have a question,
Okay.
but this is a promotional. So I'm a docent down at Second Presbyterian Church. So there are 13 Bartlett murals. Thank you for the shout out. The beautiful tree of life. But like at Fourth, underneath each of the windows is Bartlett. And it was his very first commission as a young 27-year-old. So that's 1901, that sanctuary. So if you want to see the progression of his art. But the other thing is the sanctuary architect is Howard Van Doren Shaw, which we didn't talk a lot about, but that's my question. where Cram was retained for the sanctuary, Shaw does the rest. Do you know the story of why those two architects were retained and why we have that development that
Don,
way?
I think you do.
There was a trustee of Fourth Church who was a trustee at Princeton. Cram was the resident architect at Princeton, and that's how he got to know Cram, and Cram got introduced. Cram was based in Boston. He was not here all the time, and he recognized that in the course of building this beautiful building, he needed a resident architect. And he and Howard Van Doren Shaw connected, and Shaw ended up doing everything but the sanctuary. And Cram, they worked together.
Thank you for that. What other questions do you have for Don? It looks like
I got one with
Mr. Blake has one.
Well, this is more of a shout out as well. My favorite piece of architecture in this church is a door that goes nowhere. If you look at the choir loft, the right-hand side facing the choir loft, on the second floor there is a door. If somebody came out that door, they would go splat on the floor beneath. The reason that's there is there was going to be a 2-level choir loft, but it was determined that the people on the upper level wouldn't be able to see the person leading them. So we ditched the second level, or they did, I wasn't here yet. And so that's why we have a door that goes nowhere.
See, another question answered. What other questions do you have? Oh, Terry. I like that you're making Judy get her steps in today. So the next question will need to be in the back.
Well, this is, maybe I overlooked this in what you were saying, Andrea, but so when the murals were restored, and you talked about it folding over, and were they also repainted? And if so, who could we possibly entrust to do that?
Yeah, so yes, both of those things. So mostly what was done was cleaning. And so by using the right pH solution, we're able to painstakingly clean them. In the restoration in the 90s, some had been painted, and we lost some of the detail. And I think one of the most striking things is the angels' robes were flat and didn't reflect any of the folds in those. And the folks from Parma Conservation, this is what they do. They worked on second press. The property committee did an extensive search of vendors, and they had gone deep into Frederick Clay Bartlett's work, not only just as restoration people, but knew a ton about him as an artist. So they, I want to be careful not to say they were repainted, but they were brought back to what their original intent was. Okay, well, I'm a good Presbyterian. I like to get us out on the hour.
Thank you all very much.